mic on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Liz Hustedt. Today we're going to talk about a bit of a meta topic, but that's meta with a lowercase m, so don't worry. How to learn from conferences. Hey, you're doing it right now, right? Okay, so first off, we'll talk about a little brief intro. I'll repeat a little bit of what Inez commented on. We'll talk about archetypes, how presenters and attendees typically show up to these shindigs. We'll talk about experimentation, formulating action plans, and then success and failure, what it means to be successful, and what it means to fail. And then we'll close it out. So hi, I'm Liz Hustedt. Hustedt, like Hustedt, we have a problem. My computer career definitely started in childhood, where I wanted to live inside my computer and figure out how everything worked. Right? And so when I approached computer engineering at the ripe age of 18, we're like, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? You're like, computers? You know, guess what? It wasn't exactly the spirit of diversity and inclusion at that time. And I was made to feel implicitly or explicitly unwelcome, right? You have a problem in your math class, you go in your TA hours, and they say, do you think this is the right major for you? You're goddamn right it is. Are you kidding me? You know what I'm saying? So anyway, I dropped out. I was 18. I was a little bit more, just different. Those were different years. I went into an adjacent interest of mine in nursing, which is, basically problem solving on people, right? And I worked in a neuro ICU for 5 years. But if you know anything about the Myers-Briggs personality test, I'm an ENTJ, and like caregiving roles are not our jam. So exit stage left, right? And I switched back into computer science, which did feel more intuitively aligned with what I want to do. I found an amazing partner in my databases class. Shout out to Chris. If you know anything about databases, it's where true love begins, right? I've worked anywhere from, again, large homogenous corporations, seed stage startups, mid-sized hyper-growth models. I'm unapologetically a try-hard millennial. I love learning every day. So let's get started. The first thing we'll go through is our archetypes, both the presenters and attendees. All right, so our presenters, you're going to notice a number of commonalities with presenters as they show up onto the stage. Number one, presenters typically address a common industry problem or pain point that we're all experiencing, right? And then number two, presenters share an experiment that they conducted to address said problem. Sometimes this is accompanied by anecdotal data or swaths of evidence, swaths of data to support their hypothesis. Now, the part where presenters typically vary is at the resolution. The silver bullet may give the impression that there's only one solution to a problem. Every problem is a nail and you finally have the magic hammer, right? Number two, you've got your move fast, break things, kind of archetype. And those folks might share an impressive story of rapid change, right? But what this does is it is a disservice to the long-term health of an organization, and unsurprisingly, it's not inclusive to all personality types, right? Thirdly, you've got your Zen presenter, right? And they may give a conclusion that it seems a little bit ambiguous at its face, or you might get the classic like, well, it depends, which, it's hard to garner actionable takeaways from talks like that. But sometimes these nuanced presentations better reflect the reality and the constraints that we face every day. Okay, let's move on to our attendees. That's you all. Okay, we've got our all-in attendee. We've got our go-with-the-flow folk. We've got the networker and the selective listener. First up, you got that all-in attendee. They are caffeinated. They are jazzy. They are taking notes. They are ready to be learning. I'm here for it, okay? It's exciting, right? They're engaged and very attentive. Benefits with this approach, there's probably tons of notes that you get from this and lots of takeaways. You're probably likely to retain a lot of information, or at least some of the information after talks. But the risks are that you could, come away from the conference after learning this fire hose of information, and you could introduce too many changes into your organization at once. Or after the excitement of the conference dies down, you're like, oh God, where do I start? Where do I go, right? And that's crippling, right? So you might end up not introducing any changes. And moreover, these folks could tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves before, during, and after a conference. It's not a great way for self-care. It's not really a great way to manage your stamina. Next up, you've got your go-with-the-flow people, right? Those are the people that show up to a conference like, I'm just going to sit back. I'm just going to let this information wash over me. I'll figure it out. The plan will come organically, right? Yeah. They don't need to take notes. They'll just listen. It's going to happen, right? Now, the benefits here I'm not yucking anybody's yum, folks. They manage their stamina well, right? You're not going to overextend yourself. You're like, I'm here to immerse myself, right? Now, and you could also, without that kind of busyness of taking notes, you could remain engaged in the moment, or you might be at risk of getting a little bit distracted and disengaged, with that beautiful wandering brains that we all have, right? The risks here, you likely have minimal notes, minimal takeaways, and it might be a difficult time to form that action plan to institute changes. Okay, next up, the next archetype is not one that I called out from the jump. And you've either been this person, seen this person, or helped this person. And that's the hungover attendee. I know you've done it. I know you've seen it, right? We've all been there, right? And maybe you were like jazzy as heck the first day. You were here, you're taking notes, and then you got like that team dinner. It goes a little late, and goes a little later. You wake up on day 2. Oh my God, you're feeling rough, right? And you're just trying to like get the coffee or like how much longer is this, right? And right, this is funny, but this also illustrates the fact that we are dynamic, fluid little creatures, right? You can jump from any one of these archetypes at any point during a conference or during your life, depending on the context of the situation, right? Next up, we've got our networker. They are coming to this reality show, and they are here to make friends, okay? Content be damned. I'm here to connect. And, that's fine. I also want to call out, none of these archetypes is coming from a place of judgment or me being like, you should do this and you shouldn't do that. No, it's merely acknowledging the space that we all occupy together, right? And this is your time to learn. So you get to choose how you optimize your time and energy. And these people are focused on optimizing and building relationships and learning about other people. Last up, we've got our selective listener, right? This is that person who comes into the conference and says, they read the title of the talk, right? Then they look like who's presenting. And they're like, how to learn from conferences. I'm going to zone out for that one. What's this lady going to say, right? And now look, hot take. If you zoom out and look at the entire lifespan of a conference, this could be a great way to retain information, right? Because there's power in saying no. There's power in saying, all right, I choose to invest my time and energy into this and not this and this. But there's a fine line between the power in saying no and prematurely judging something before you have all the information, which puts you at risk for missing out on some awesome vaporwave slides, okay? So with that, which one are you? Like today, right now, with the caffeine on board or the whatever, the tea. Let's talk about experimentation. How can we create meaningful action plans and evaluate what we've learned? Now, along the timeline of a conference, there's some key inflection points. And at each step along the way, there are things that you can do to enhance your learning or better formulate your experiment or your action plan. For example, before the conference, right, it's key that you set your intention for this week. And I say this week because your learning doesn't start and stop at the beginning and the end of this conference, right? Give yourself that space to absorb before, prepare, and then let that stuff marinate as you're coming home, right? So at the outset of the conference, you identify and write down your goal. What are you going to take away from this week? What do you expect to learn? What changes do you want to make within your team or your code or your organization? Now, you might be looking at this slide and listening to me and saying, before the conference, but we're in it. We missed it. What are we going to do? Not to worry. You get to take 1 minute right now. Get out your phones. Get out your whatever, your Post-its. I'm literally going to give you a minute right now. And if you participated in any sort of goal-setting exercise, maybe if annual reviews, right? We know that goals should be concise, actionable, not too specific, and not too vague. But for the purposes of this exercise right now, don't overthink it. Your time starts now. You get 1 minute. I hear brain cells. I love it. I love that people are writing or pretending to write. I appreciate all of you. So, you got about 15 seconds. So now that you definitely have your goal, you get to settle in for the ride. A great way to capture takeaways during talks is by taking notes, which you're probably thinking right now, oh Lord, they put some lady up on stage to tell us that we need to take notes. What a patronizing goddamn concept, right? But and it is, I'm sorry, okay. But there's a cool study about memory and how when we diversify the information that comes into our bodies, into our brains, we are more likely to retain it, right? For example, you're hearing me speak, you're seeing my slides, right? You're writing your notes in your own way, right? That's diversifying how the media comes into you. And I also linked another study about the comparison between handwritten notes and notes captured via laptop, right? You can check it out, but TLDR, handwritten notes increases the retention of information over notes captured via laptop, okay? But like all of that is said, like how you take notes, well, you can optimize this until like for the rest of your life. The point is not to have the most accurate, transcription of things that have happened at this conference. Nor am I trying to sell you my bespoke collection of handmade journals and pens. Like I have to come to my little station. No, right? There's no Etsy shop here. Okay. The point of this is to stay active and engaged with the content. But I also want to acknowledge that note-taking is not the most accessible or inclusive way to learn material, right? To stay engaged, right? So when we take into account disabilities, when we take into account neurodivergence, you've got to employ different strategies. So one strategy to approach this is by distilling your thoughts down immediately after each talk. Take those 2 minutes between speakers to capture 1 to 4 sentences while the content is still fresh in your mind. Or, golly, this is a really stimulating experience. You're in back-to-back-to-back speakers, right? A lot of context switching, a lot of learning here. This might feel like chaos for your brain. And I want you to know that, again, you have the power to say no. I want you to be aware of when you're starting to tap out, and you're like, oh my God, all these people look so engaged. And maybe the social norm is that everybody's sitting and politely scribbling things and attentive, but you're not. You can't get there, right? You have permission to say no, to stand up, to walk out, to get a little drink, to take a little walk or a big walk, or go to a room to de-stimulate and recharge, right? Do what feels good and nourishing for your body. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And that goes with all things in life, right? I mean, I guess except sprinting. Okay, so you're literally sprinting, but even think about agile methodology. We work in sprints. Anyway, that's a whole separate TED talk. But okay, then immediately after, and I mean immediately after the conference, you have another opportunity to distill down and condense what you've learned, right? And a Midwesterner, I typically have the opportunity and the burden to travel to these conferences, right? So my distillation time typically happens on that plane ride back, right? So if you have a large swath of notes, distill them down into 1 to 4 sentences per talk. Reevaluate your goal if you need to. Maybe you learned something that you didn't expect and you want to shift your approach. Then you get to make an action plan of 1 to 2 meaningful things, actions or philosophies that you want to introduce into your organization or your team or your code. Your action plan should have clear success criteria so you can evaluate whether or not you were successful or your experiment was successful. Not you, your experiment. Resist the urge to change too much at once so you can, number 1, properly and methodically observe the changes you're introducing into your system. And number 2, allow time for others in your organization to learn about these changes, to get on board, because, we all have different levels of buy-in, people with different levels of risk tolerance. Simultaneously, I want you to resist the urge to wait until the time is right, Now, there's some times where it just feels like, oh, if I wait until this person's hired and then we finally have this team put together. Well, okay, maybe try to nudge yourself to do something a little bit outside your comfort zone. Although there are clear cases when you should not introduce change into an organization. For example, has your org just undergone layoffs? Hi, let's focus on recovery, rebuilding trust. Introducing more change into an organization can destabilize the surviving employees, right? All right, 6 months or so later, I put 6 months as an arbitrary timeline that would make sense for your experiment, right? Did you satisfy your success criteria? What did you learn along the way? Why was it successful? After you determine these things, then you get to create your own LeadDev talk. And you get to come up here and you get to present on the stage, right? Even if your experiment was not a rousing success. You know, because failures are just as informative for ourselves and others as successes are. And there's a distinct possibility the experiment you designed didn't work, right? Or your hypothesis is disproven. Or somehow you feel like you have failed. Remember earlier when I said whether you were successful and then I nixed my language and I said your experiment? Because I want to make sure that you understand our ego is removed from this, right? Because you might feel bad about yourself if you perceive that you've failed. And if you feel bad, then you're less likely to try something new again. But it doesn't have to be that way. What I want to encourage you to do is to remove that blame, that shame, that ego from the result of these experiments or anything you do. Have radical acceptance and compassion for yourself coming out of this conference and going forward as you assess your experiments. And honestly, as you do everything in life, you know. Oops, we're not going by yet. And also acknowledge the state of your organization. Maybe it wasn't the right company size or the right timing or the right political climate to institute the change you outlined, which can be so frustrating. But our systems and our people are imperfect for a reason. Whether it's technical, political, or market-driven, our systems have constraints and flaws. There's a story for every single system and why it exists as it does today. The more you're able to radically accept yourself and your organization, the more you're able to objectively perceive them. And with that objectivity and that compassion, you can institute incremental improvements. Because look, it is hard to work in large groups of beautifully flawed mortals, right? It's hard to solve problems together. But hopefully, we can make it easier, one intentional, compassionate change at a time. All right, if you have any questions, meet me during break. Here's some contact info if you need some more Liz in your life. But wait, before I go, you get to take these 2 minutes to write down your takeaways from my talk and from Tara's. Thank you sincerely for your attention. Keep being kind. Take care.